And if Malachi Branham continues to struggle into next season, then there's even more minutes and opportunity for him to be a scorer off the bench.
Yeah, and I don't mean to smile when you're talking about Malachi Branham potentially struggling, because I want Malachi to
Right.
live, be everything that we want him to be. But the reason that I smirked a little bit is because we're about to do our offseason roster breakdown, which
Hmm.
we haven't done to kind of set the stage for who's on contract heading into the draft. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up here, Ethan. It's just going to be a little picture here that'll probably go across our faces. I thought I could share the notes tab, but I think this will
It'll
be
probably pull over to the side, right? With
a
the
little
new.
better. Let's see. Let's see if I can do that. I don't think I can.
Ah.
Yeah,
Oh.
no, we can. I'm sorry. This is right over our face, but y'all can hear us and y'all can see it. And that is the most important thing. You can see Ethan a little bit more now. But look at the 2 position, Ethan.
Yeah, I see it.
if Malachi Branham continues to struggle and say we pick a point guard, we could easily, I mean, you could move Blake Wesley to take his minutes and then play whoever you drafted at the 1.
Absolutely. And let's be completely honest, Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham are pretty much the same size. I think it's just their style of play that has them slotted at point guard and shooting guard because Malachi plays that classical get to your spot, has a mid range game, turnaround jumpers, methodical, and Blake is just get the ball off the rim and just take off in transition and make plays for others. But they could absolutely kind of flip flop back and forth, or just, like you said, play whoever we draft next to Blake Wesley.
Yeah, that was just something I was thinking about, and it wasn't a thought that I had until I looked at the roster in total. But let's go position by position here, Ethan. I'm going to read the names to you, and I just want you to give me your thoughts on the position as a whole and, your thoughts on it going into the offseason with potential moves, the draft, etc.
Okay.
So the point guard position is actually the one right now of people actually on contract that is completely full.
Mm.
We have Trey Jones, Blake Wesley. We just mentioned maybe he ends up getting moved to the 2. We'll see what happens. But as of right now, Blake Wesley, Devontae Graham. So those are your 3 that are on full contract. But then you've also got Jamari Bouye on a 2-way. So that is 4 guys at the point guard position.
Yeah. I like it, but I also don't. And that's why we kind of want to draft somebody at 4 or 8 to kind of help fix that problem. Booyah, obviously a two-way player. Devontae Graham, a veteran, likely not going to play that much next year, but an important third stringer for sure. Blake Wesley has some upside. Trey Jones, I think, is a extremely talented backup point guard at his best. So I think we're missing that explosive piece, which is what we're trying to find in the draft.
I think the thing that stands out to me here, Ethan, is, and I know, you can't predict Spurs trades, but I think Devontae Graham is a name to watch. He's
Right.
going on his expiring contract, and say we're in a situation where we do like Blake Wesley at the 1. And even if he doesn't play this year, we want him to compete for that spot. If that's the case, Devontae Graham could be a name that gets moved, in like a Josh Richardson type trade, in the trade that we got him for. But just because now he's going into an expiring contract, even though it is $12 million, that's a name to watch that we could move for picks. But also, I think that's a buyout candidate as well. We could just buy him out to open up space there if we do want Blake Wesley to play the 1. But that's also why I brought up the conversation a little bit earlier that if Malachi's struggling, you might just roll with whoever you drafted, and you might feel like Blake's going to be the 2 moving forward anyway.
Right. I think that part all kind of stands on the fact that if he improves his 3-point shot, like Blake Wesley has to improve his 3-point shot before we can comfortably move him to the 2 guard permanently.
The one thing I will say about that, though, is like how different. I mean, I'm sure Malachi's percentage is a little bit better from what we just read, but
Mm-hmm.
how different is Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham's 3-point shooting?
Big time difference.
You think so?
It's like 14, 15%.
Okay. I'm just a little bit more down on Malachi coming out of the season, I think, in my head then. You're bringing me back to reality here,
I
Ethan.
think
But
he's like 34, 35%, if I'm not
yeah.
mistaken.
And with all the comments we get about Malachi too, that probably delves into my psyche a little bit,
For
and it
sure.
makes me think He's worse than he is. But see, yeah, if he's even at like 34%, really for a second year player, like that's not that crazy. As much as this was offensively, a little bit of a disappointing season for Malachi, but obviously adding Victor Wembanyama has a ton to do with that.
Mm.
But I think the bigger point here, Ethan, is now we move on to the 2 position is with potentially drafting someone at the 1, going back to that Blake Wesley conversation for the last time, they could just decide we're going to pick a point guard and then Blake and Malachi are going to battle it out for the backup 2 spot. And maybe even, throughout the season, they could be interchanged depending on who's playing better.
Right. I don't have a problem with that at all. I mean, that's kind of what they did to Malachi early in the year. It just so happened that we didn't have a rookie point guard to play next to Blake Wesley. We had Devontae Graham, so
Mm-hmm.
they weren't going to do that. They played those two together, and it kind of worked. Like Malachi definitely improved after that, as well as Blake Wesley. But then Malachi took another dive, which is what I think that taste in your mouth is like. He went up and then he went right kind of back down. So
It's like my thoughts are at the end of the season, Ethan. The same
yeah.
thing with the Blake 3-point shooting. I gotta think of it in totality. But
Hmm.
more importantly, Devin Vassell and Malachi Branham are the 2 shooting guards on the roster as of right now. What are your thoughts on both of them, and then also the open roster spot at the 2?
It's a big year for both of them. I think Devin Vassell played great last year. I think he was by far and away the best duo partner for Victor Wembanyama. Other than Trey Jones, I think he kind of developed a chemistry the fastest with Victor Wembanyama, especially in the pick and roll. We know what he's able to do as a scorer. I think he needs to get to 20 plus next year, points per game. I mean, on efficient scoring. He needs to just be absolutely, unquestionably the Robin to Victor Wembanyama's Batman. That's my goal for him. Malachi Branham, if he pulls everything together, I think he's a more than capable backup shooting guard. I think he's still got a lot of room to grow. It's also only his second season last year. But for him, if he's at his best, he's a guy that can get you 15 a game on efficient shooting coming off the bench and just be just a flamethrower where we really don't lose that much offense when Devin is resting.
Yeah, the only thing for Malachi is, and if we were to read a Malachi article, I think they're probably. I mean, with the way that his offensive game kind of tailed off a little bit at the end of the season, consistency there, getting back into
Yes.
rhythm with those pull up jumpers, and making the catch and shoot ones as well. Just kind of like I said, getting back into rhythm there is the focus.
Hmm.
But the bigger thing for Malachi is defense. That's
Yes.
the only thing this offseason that it's like. I mean, I say only thing, but that should be the main focus for Malachi this offseason, and I'm sure it is.
Yeah, you'd hope the offense is just a rhythm thing and a confidence thing, but you're right. Defense has been bad since day one. He needs to improve.
And it's kind of funny because Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham are kind of inverted in that sense.
Kinda, yeah. They both need to improve on the opposite thing.
So yeah, that's why, especially them battling it out, like I'm starting to see that more. But whenever you talk about Devin Vassell, I'm reminded of one more thing from that Jonathan Givony
Mm.
interview on the Ringer, Ethan. He said the 2 players that the Spurs consider untouchable are Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell. And I was surprised to hear, well, I mean, from our perspective as people who are super locked into the Spurs, we really feel like Jeremy Sohan has an argument to be in that conversation. But if we're just being completely realistic with Victor Wembanyama and, with all of also the other smoke coming out about how if the Spurs really do want to accelerate the timeline, Jeremy Sohan is somebody who, if we are going to make a big trade, may have to be included. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
I'm
hope
not I'm
not.
not saying for sure. Yeah, like I hope not to.
I would throw him in there if I was the GM as well as untouchable, but I understand why they didn't. But Devin Vassell, absolutely, without question, untouchable.
Yeah. And I don't want to consider that for Jeremy either, but if the Spurs are in the market for like going after somebody like a Donovan Mitchell, just for the total sake of conversation, like they really
Hmm.
want to get that other star, you're going to have to give up one of your high potential guys and probably the highest. Like if I'm another team, and I don't mean this in any bad way, but if I'm another GM for another team and I'm trading one of my stars to the Spurs, Jeremy Sohan's like a non-negotiable.
I was watching TSR, who was I'm sorry, I don't know the guy's name. He was doing an Atlanta
I
Hawks.
watched this too.
You did,
Yeah.
and he was like, "I'm not taking any call for Dejounte or Trey where y'all are not offering me Devin Vassell." And I was like, well, I guess we're just not going to get Trae Young or DeJounte Murray because that's not going to happen. But he was like, if y'all are offering me Malachi Branham, Keldon Johnson, and Zach Collins, he's like, I'm hanging up the phone. And I was like, yeah. I was like, I
I mean,
understand.
fair.
Yeah, fair point. But that's all we're going to offer.
Right. And so, but the bigger point is Gavoni mentioned that, and that was the first time that I'd heard like a national guy like that mention a name other than Victor in the untouchable conversation. And when you talk about Devin really establishing himself this year, this is his first year with big contract money,
Right.
so they're going to expect that from him. And our boy Rob Trejo Jr., he also has talked about this, and he's like, with the Spurs culture and him having that contract money, it's not just Devin Vassell who's going to be expecting that from himself, but the Spurs will be demanding and expecting that. It's going to be a different tone than when you're making $5 million to like 28.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm really excited for Devin Vassell. We just got to figure out what happens with the backup 2 position. And I'll just throw this in there just for the sake of throwing it in there. There could be a chance that our guy David Duke Jr. may end up potentially getting that third string spot.
There is a possibility. And he played really well the last couple of games for the Spurs, I thought.
And played really well in the G League as well for the Austin Spurs. I don't know for sure if that's going to be a thing, but if we don't try to like upgrade the backup position and we roll in with like a Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham type deal where we're not necessarily maybe like where we're not like full at the guard position, whether that's the 1 or the 2. David Duke Jr. I think is a name to watch for the third string 2 position.
For sure.
Moving on to the 3, Ethan, Keldon Johnson, Julian Champagnie, and CD Sissoko.
This one's fun. I love Keldon Johnson. I think we're probably one of the few Spurs channels that are still fans of his. I still harp back on what he does for the Spurs. He's so unselfish. I don't understand why he gets labeled as selfish because he's literally the opposite. Like, sure,
Flight. That's why he gets labeled as selfish. To be honest, it's Flight.
Is it really?
Do you know who Flight
I
is?
know who he is, but I don't watch him.
Okay, so Flight reacts. Yeah, he just always calls him. He's like the Johnson Keldon dude. He just kind of always. I mean, he does that with a lot of players, but of course, not even just all the Spurs fans, but everybody on the internet watching that with his giant fan base. I mean, he craps on a lot of the team, but he doesn't like he gives Vassell some credit from time to time, and basically everybody else he kind of craps on. And it's also just like his like. I'm not trying to criticize for him. It's just shtick. Yeah, exactly. Like it's not like personal or anything.
Right.
But I think that does stem a little bit into the Keldon Johnson hate.
That's where the group thought comes from. But I like Keldon Johnson, especially off the bench. I think he provided us something last year that you kind of pointed out to everybody, which is unlike Trey Jones, you have to kind of send an extra guy, Keldon Johnson, especially when he is barreling at the rim and he gets hot, because he can score in different ways where Trey Jones is just physically incapable. So if he continues in that track, I'm perfectly fine with him being the 6th man, but he's another name that we'll have to keep an eye on because he's a guy that's constantly in trade rumors for the Spurs every offseason and every trade deadline. Julian Champagnie, who was our actual starter last year, I think he'll be on the team for the entire season. I like Julian. I think he doesn't make very many mistakes. I think he also got better as the season progressed. All he does is shoot threes and play defense. If you're expecting anything else from Julian Champagnie, then you're a fool. No offense, but like if he does something other than that, then we're happy. Okay, let's be happy for him because that's not something that he normally does. But I do think he will get consistent minutes unless we draft a guy like a Rasache or a starting caliber small forward. What were you going to say?
No, keep going ahead.
Okay.
I was just agreeing that's a great point.
If we do that, then unfortunately, I think he will be relegated to like a third string 3/2 that maybe takes that place of David Duke Jr. He could be kind of a combo 3-2 guy. But CD Sissoko is a name that I really want to keep an eye on because he I think needs to get some playing time next year because we've talked about it at length of his potential, his versatility, his strength. At only 19 years old, he's already got a grown man's body. And we saw a couple games with the Spurs last year where he, just off of sheer athleticism and dunks and playing in transition, was able to get double-digit points. He can rebound. He can play defense. He's physical. He could possibly be a guy that also gets minutes at the 4 spot as well, which we're about to get into. But he's a guy that I think everybody should be extremely excited about his upside.
Yeah, this is an interesting position. I'll start with CD going into the offseason. The two things for me: shooting and
Right,
fouling,
right.
and
That's
maybe
it.
a little bit of like having a tighter handle. But like that's really it.
I'm with that.
Um, the thing that makes the three position so intriguing to me, Ethan, and you just brought up something that I hadn't considered yet. Maybe we're because so I was thinking of Julian Champagny potentially maybe being at the four spot. We did play that a little
Oh,
bit this
right.
season, but more it's because the Spurs released their measurements prior to this season with him at 6'9", when initially they had him at 6'7". And you never know with these heights, Ethan. I think as we've learned on this channel, what's true and what's not true. But I think what you can tell when he's on the court, I think he is a little bit taller than 6'7". Like I think
Right.
he has the height, not saying the frame, to like obviously Julian Champagny is going to get bullied playing the four. Like I'm not trying to sit here
Hmm.
and say that that won't happen against high level players. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've been talking about the two positions we've been talking about, Ethan, for the draft are the 1 and the 3. And we've already got three guys at the 3 that honestly moving forward, I mean, maybe, we've talked about Champagny easily being relegated to, a third string spot, especially with his contract. Um, but we've been thinking about picking somebody at this position, and we've already got a lot of guys there. So to me, I'm like, are all of these guys going to stay at the 3? I know we're in the era of positionless basketball, but at the same time, like one of these guys has got to play the 4 or the 2. When you just mentioned that about Champagny, as much as he is that tall, I'm not mad at him maybe even playing the 2. Now that
That's
I'm thinking about it, over a Malachi Branham if he's struggling, or even if Malachi ends up, ascending more, he could be the third string too. Really, Champagny's got a lot of versatility. You could technically say just because of his height, 2 through
hmm
4. Personally, I do see him as more of a 3 or a 2, just with his game, despite being very tall. Um, but yeah, that was another thing I was thinking of. It's not just the 4; it could also be the 2 where you could potentially move him. But the bigger thing about this conversation, Ethan, is we probably think that CD Sissoko is going to overtake Champagny. Like you would probably agree that long
hmm
term that's the goal, that's the hope, and that he has a higher ceiling.
Yes.
So if that's the case, you'd probably want, unless we draft somebody and they just end up taking those minutes, and we move him to the 4. We could talk about that, but just for the sake of this conversation with him at the 3, like, I guess I'm just asking what happens if we draft somebody at the 3. Do you think that guarantees that like a Keldon Johnson is going to get traded? Or is that just we're going to move Champagny to the 2 and then CD and whoever we draft are going to compete for that backup spot? But the other key context there, Ethan, is like, is Keldon Johnson going to be a starter again? Is that even in the works? Like, you know what I'm saying? Is that even like,
Mm.
or not even in the works, but is that even a consideration of the Spurs? Do you kind of see what I'm getting at here with the
Right.
draft conundrum and the people we have on the roster? Just give me your thoughts.
It's a great problem to have, in my opinion. And I think that their versatility allows for a lot of different possibilities. I think Champagny moving to the 2 is more of a likelihood than him moving to the 4. And I honestly think Sissoko, let's say we draft a 3 and he's ready to go. He's going to be our starting 3. Keldon's the guy off the bench. I think for CD, his competition is not for the backup 3. I think it's for the backup 4, personally, between him and possibly Mamu.
Right.
Um, because I know he's what 6'6", 6'7". He's not super tall, but I think he's got the athleticism and strength to battle down there. In the same sense that Keldon did earlier in his career, but Keldon was 6'5". I think Sissoko has more upside to defend bigger guys, also just stronger. So to me, that's probably the solution. But it all depends on who we draft, and unfortunately, we really have no idea who we are going to draft because that's the Spurs.
For sure, Ethan. And the 4 position that we get into here in a second, I think will open up that conversation a little bit more, and maybe give us a little bit more thoughts and maybe clarity on that. But the last thing I'll touch on with CD Sissoko, you mentioned his size and him potentially playing the 4. we played Chetty Osman at the backup 4 for most of this season.
Right.
He's 6'7", 230. CD Sissoko was listed at 6'7", 225. So that's essentially the same frame that we've already played there before. But I do still feel like CD is naturally, more of a 3. I think he
For
can
sure.
play the small ball 4. And if that is the situation, I do want it to be off the bench. But at the same time, it's just it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, Ethan, because again, I do feel like his full potential would be as a 3.
I would agree.
But that moves us to the 4 position, Ethan, and there's only one person on contract. Well, there's technically 2, but one's on a 2-way, and that's Raekwon Gray coming back. Him and
Bobby,
Jamari.
he's Bobby Portis Jr. Say his name right. Raekwon Gray.
I'm forgetting that we're going to give Dominic Barlow a max contract, though.
Oh, that's also true.
Yo, my boy Barlow. Should we just have our moment right now and accept it that it's probably done?
I hope it's not.
But it
yeah,
probably is,
it
right?
probably is, yeah.
Cue the Titanic music, man. I hope he gets a roster spot somewhere else and he will be my Eubanks forever. And he really will fulfill his destiny as the next Eubanks by leaving the team.
Yeah. Get meaningful minutes on a championship contender. Do us
Oh,
proud, Dom. Actually,
Dom.
Drew went to Portland first, which was like the worst team in the league, remember? And then he got
That's
traded
true.
to Phoenix. So go
Yeah.
to the Wizards, Dom, and get traded to the Nuggets midway through the season.
Hey, Bilal Barlow powerhouse in the
Whoa.
East.
I like that.
Watch like 2
Well,
days later, Spurs have signed Dominic Barlow to 2-year deal.
Barlall.
Oh, and but also with Mamu, man, with
Right.
the pictures we just talked about him, that's another thing. Like, in all seriousness, as much as I love my boy Dom Barlow, I've loved the saga we've had with him. With the Mamu thing, that also only adds that's probably not going to happen, especially with the way that he played. But here's the more important thing, Ethan. Enough about Barlow. Jeremy Sohan is the only 4 we have on the roster.
Right.
So the other thing that has popped into my mind draft-wise, and I'm going to dish it to you after this, a lot of the 3s we're thinking about picking are pretty tall. So like, say a Rasache falls to us at 4. Maybe he's just going to end up playing the 4. Maybe not necessarily starting immediately, but you know what I'm saying? Because he would be taller than a CD. He wouldn't have the same physicals, though. So that is also true. But also then if you're picking him, he's probably going to be the starter anyway at the 3 regardless, now that I think about it.
I
Yeah.
think so.
I
I
think
don't think
Bijan Salon, go ahead.
all I was going to say, the only guy, I was really going to say what you think. The only guy I think that we could draft that would play the 4 over the 3 is Salon.
And
Otherwise, no.
yeah, and there's so much smoke for him at 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're gonna draft a guard at 4. Like, I really think I think we're gonna draft Reed Shepard or we're gonna draft Stephon Castle. We just read the Gavoni thing, and we've also remembered the thing last week. The Spurs are said to be big fans of Castle. We're seeing more mocks about him. We've talked about the divisional advantages that bringing in a point guard of his size would do for us defensively. I mean, maybe we'll be proven wrong if like a Rasache falls, but if everything goes kind of how we think it is, Castle is going to be in the discussion at 4, to say the least. Don't you think, Ethan?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're probably going to go with a wing at 8, which makes the Salon thing even more of a possibility. Maybe it's somebody else that we end up, going with. But if we get Salon, like you said, when I looked at this roster, Ethan, the first thing I thought was like, oh, Tijon at 8. Like, that's really what I was thinking, because I didn't realize how open the 4 position was.
Right.
Because maybe there's even a world where we just want to play Keldon and CD at the 3, and we like that. And last year, Champagny was just a tank move in reality. You know what I mean?
Imagine.
Like, if we start Keldon Johnson next year, that will confirm that Champagny was just total, like, that was just tank move.
Or CD, dude. Imagine if we started CD.
I wouldn't be mad at that. I think he's going to have to adjust, but I also think that him in the starting lineup would kind of, well, I think it depends on who our point guard is. Because the thing is, if you have CD and Castle, as much as defensively that sounds awesome, shooting wise, we still have the same issues
It's even
with
worse.
with Castle, Sohan, and
CD
yeah, all on the floor.
or
Then you've
Devin.
literally just got Devin, yeah, like and Victor, but Victor's still like kind of getting there percentage wise, you know. So
That'd be awful. Yeah, never
yeah,
mind. No, we're not doing that.
I like how we both had that initial gut reaction. But final thoughts on the 4 position.
Only thing I'll say is Jeremy, get in the gym, work on that handle, work on that jump shot. We'll see you next year.
And we'll see what happens with the rest of the position,
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, everything else is up in the air. We'll see.
Raekwon Gray breakout. That's my prediction.
There we
He's going
go.
to earn a contract like Barlow and
I like it.
and average 40. Okay. The center position. This is actually interesting. This is the other full position on the roster. Well, technically the 3 is too, but Victor Wembanyama, obviously, and then Zach Collins and Charles Bassey.
Hmm.
There's really not too much to say about Victor. So, what are your thoughts on the Zach Collins, Charles Bassey conundrum, I guess you could say?
I think that the Bassi sample was skewed because he was injured so quickly. His stats weren't great in the games that he played, but obviously we were terrible and we were still learning how to play with each other. So there's that part that makes it skewed as well. I'm looking forward to him getting a full opportunity. I think he should be the backup center for us. This is a big take, but I think he should be the backup center behind Wemby next year because he's a physical presence. He's going to fight for boards. He's a strong roller to the rim in pick and roll situations. And everything that was unfortunately bad for Mr. Collins last year is going to be a strength for Chuck Bass. Um, Other than shooting, neither of them can shoot. And that was unfortunate for Zach this year. I think if Zach Collins gets in the gym this summer and just does nothing but shoot threes and he becomes a 40% shooter overnight, I'll eat my words. We can put him at the backup spot because he is a great playmaker, and he does a lot of high IQ things for us. But his shooting was so bad last year, and it was compounded by the fact that he couldn't fight for an extra rebound, and he's just kind of soft on the inside. And I hate saying that because
I
I was
know,
so
dude.
high on him in off season last year, but that's ultimately where I am, Jude. I think we have to give Chuck Bass the nod and let him move into that spot because if we're being honest, Zach Collins is not a part of our future, and we gave Chuck that big not big contract, but long contract. So we need to give him the opportunity to prove that he's worth it.
He also, as much as he has had some injuries, he still has an untapped ceiling at like 23.
Yeah, he's younger, and I don't even know if I'd call him injury prone. Like he had one. Did he have a bunch before that I'm not understanding?
I think last year he had one, but I could be misremembering that.
Who knows? Maybe they're right in the comments. I wouldn't know if I'd call him injury prone yet. Let's see if he gets injured again, and then we'll go with that.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I would that's kind of how I feel on that too. I didn't have the comments up right now, so if they are saying that, I understand where you're coming from, but I think like I want to give him one more
Yeah.
because it's not the same as like Topic where it's like okay, like a month after he got hurt. Like it
Mhm.
was he had an injury last season and then but I think I don't know. I'd have to go look back at that. Cuz we just picked him up. We picked him up from the two-way contract and I don't know. Maybe I could sit here and wonder for forever, Ethan. But to be all honest, I just need to go back and look it up. But I could be wrong about that.
Hmm.
Um, but more importantly, to wrap up this episode, I understand where you're coming from. I had the same thoughts, and it just goes back. You know, it's almost like similar to the Klingon argument. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that Charles Bassey is the same player or will have the same ceiling as Donovan Klingon. I don't think he will. He's a little bit smaller, but he's also more physical than Zach. He's going to be able to hold his own on the boards more. And another thing, Ethan, everything that you said, I basically echo. The run, jump, and dunk physical center, that's essentially that's the things that we needed off the bench. And those were the things that unfortunately we weren't getting from Zach. And, you know, the counter argument to that is, okay, well, he can stretch the floor to kind of mitigate those things. And unfortunately, it wasn't successful this season. But what I want to get back to, and this will be the last thing before we wrap up. Remember last year going into the offseason when he said that Zach was the 5 of the future?
Hmm.
It's so unfortunate how at the end of last season, the way that he looked, and I know we've referenced this numerous times, but still, and then the way that this season went, because like you said, like you mentioned earlier, like you feel almost bad, like calling him soft inside. It's like, Zach, if you ever watched this, like we were very excited when we signed you, like, and I know
Mhm.
there are other things that
We're
it's
making it worse.
I don't care, extenuating circumstances, bro,
Mhm.
like, but it's just been tough this season.
Mhm.
They're just, that was the clear deficiency watching the game. But
Yep.
like there were he did have some injuries this season, right?
Zach?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, very minor. Like he ended up coming back. It was that time when Barlow, when we were talking about Barlow. That's
Yes.
the thing, Ethan. Like when we legitimately have an argument about Barlow, like, and the interior defense looking better with Barlow in there, it tells you something. And maybe he comes back next year and it was just, a rough year and he's fully
Mhm.
healthy and he ascends. But last year was the year where we felt like that was going to happen. It was like
Mhm.
we had the benefit of the doubt. And then just this whole season, it was a whole sample size of roughness. And unfortunately, kind of for his career, even when he was in Portland, now that I'm looking back, that's been the story kind of.
Yep, it has. And I do want to rephrase one thing before we begin to wrap this discussion up. But I said soft inside. He's not soft. He was easily scored on in the paint. Let me put it
No,
that way because he's
because
not a
he'll
soft player.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, he's not soft. He will tell somebody off. That is a fact. You were just talking about interior defense and
Yes.
unfortunately being physically,
Outplayed. Yep.
yes, at times. All right, Ethan. That pretty much wraps up our roster breakdown going into the draft. Any final thoughts on that as we wrap that up?
I don't, but there's not another topic after this, is there, Jude?
No, there's not.
Okay. Do you have any final thoughts on that before I bring something up?
Ooh, okay, so you have something to talk about.
It's gonna take literally a minute and a
Okay.
half.
Okay. I'm just interested to see how the main thing that I'm looking at is the 3 and the 4.
Hmm.
Because I think we're going to draft a 1 regardless, and because of Blake's combo guard ability, like I can see all that playing out. Or we just, we buy out Devontae or trade him for a couple
Hmm.
picks. Like I can see how that plays out. But I'm really intrigued to see how the 3 and the 4 position plays out. And it may just be as simple as we're going to take Salon at 8, like all of the smoke.
Hmm.
And the quote that I brought up earlier of him talking to Jeff G, saying he's been in contact with the Spurs and he talks to Wemby all the time.
Well said. That would be my final points as well.